In episode 24, titled Set Risk Appetite and Choose Effective Treatments, we convert risk appetite from a slogan into thresholds that steer consistent, repeatable choices. When appetite is only a mood statement, teams debate each decision from scratch, and the loudest voice wins. When appetite becomes explicit limits tied to money, time, safety, and compliance, choices align without ceremony, and variance becomes the exception that requires evidence. The practical aim is simple. Write thresholds that any competent analyst or manager would apply the same way when presented with the same facts, so the organization behaves predictably under pressure and can defend its decisions afterward.
Risk appetite and risk tolerance are related but not interchangeable, and both must connect to measurable limits. Appetite is the overall level and shape of risk the organization is willing to carry in pursuit of its objectives. Tolerance is the allowable deviation around targets for specific categories or services. Appetite sounds like, we will carry moderate cyber risk for speed to market, while tolerance sounds like, customer-facing outages may not exceed 60 minutes per quarter, or unauthorized disclosure events may not exceed 1,000 records per year. Tie these to clocks, counters, and currency, outage minutes, breach counts, fraud dollars, delinquent change approvals, and regulatory penalties. Use timeframes that match executive reviews, because thresholds that cannot be measured before the next meeting will not control behavior between meetings.
Criteria should not materialize by wishful thinking. Derive them from strategy, regulations, and stakeholder expectations with traceability. Strategy defines what matters most and where the organization will accept pain to gain advantage. So thresholds must mirror revenue engines, brand promises, and delivery models. Regulations impose hard floors on what is acceptable, with penalties and reporting triggers that become anchors for compliance-related tolerances. Stakeholders, including customers, partners, and employees, bring service expectations that are formalized in service-level agreements and informal norms. Both become real when churn, attrition, or reputational metrics move. The art is to pull these sources into a short set of criteria that fit on a page, then stick to them when specific cases tempt special pleading. General appetite statements are not enough. Require category-specific thresholds for safety, availability, privacy, and fraud, and align each to real metrics. Safety may carry zero tolerance for life-threatening incidents and no single point of failure that can bypass physical safeguards, measured by incident class counts and audit findings. Availability thresholds can define maximum outage minutes per month, recovery time objective on critical services, and mean time to restore, measured from monitoring and incident timelines. Privacy thresholds can bound records exposed, time to contain and notify, and repeat incident counts by system, measured from case systems and legal logs. Fraud thresholds should specify monthly loss caps, chargeback rates, and false positive limits, measured from finance and operations reports. Write each threshold with a clear counter, a clock, and a responsible owner for the measurement. Treatment options, avoid, mitigate, transfer, accept, must be chosen against criteria and timing windows rather than by habit. Avoidance removes the risky activity altogether when the upside is weak or the downside is existential. It deserves a seat at the table when scenarios threaten safety or compliance ceilings. Mitigation changes likelihood, impact, or both through technical, procedural, or architectural controls. It is selected when control objectives and deadlines can push residual below tolerance in the available window. Transfer shifts specific loss components through insurance, contracts, or indemnities. It makes sense when counterparties can price and assume the exposure better than you can. Acceptance records a deliberate decision to live with the exposure because costs or constraints preclude other options now. It cannot be a default and must carry conditions and a reevaluation date. Mitigation only works when it ties directly to control objectives and expected residual risk, with verification of effectiveness built in. For each scenario, state which dimension moves, likelihood, impact, or both, by how much and why. Map each objective to controls that can be tested: authentication strength, segmentation boundaries, backup immutability, change approval gates, or monitoring coverage. Define the evidence that proves movement: test results, sampled logs, before and after incident rates, or red team success probabilities. Then schedule verification.
when the change lands, when the first effectiveness review occurs, and how ongoing monitoring will flag drift. Residual estimates must be traceable to these verification artifacts. Otherwise, residual is only a polite hope dressed as a number. Transfer deserves careful explanation because insurance, contracts, and indemnities do not make risk disappear. They reallocate specific loss components with conditions. Cyber insurance may cover incident response costs, business interruption within waiting periods and sublimits, or liability to third parties, but it will not repair reputational harm or regulatory status by itself. Contracts can assign liabilities, warranties, and service obligations to vendors, yet your brand still faces the customer, and your regulators still expect your house to be in order. Indemnities offset certain legal or financial impacts if a counterparty fails, but enforcement takes time and may not match the timing of your cash needs. State exactly what shifts, cost categories, timing, caps, and exclusions, and what remains yours no matter what. Acceptance requires documented rationale, explicit sign-offs, review dates, and live monitoring for drift. A decision to accept residual above appetite for a period should explain the business benefit, the constraints that block mitigation or transfer now, the conditions that would trigger reconsideration, and the date when the decision expires if not renewed. Capture signatures from the accountable executive and the function that carries the operational exposure, because shared assent prevents finger-pointing later. Tie the accepted scenario to near real-time indicators so that changes in threat activity, asset value, or control posture surface early instead of after a quarterly surprise. Acceptance is not a shrug. It is a controlled, time-boxed bet that is watched closely. Pre-commit review gates prevent large residuals from sliding through on optimism. Define thresholds that, when exceeded, automatically escalate proposed treatments to executives or governance boards before funds are committed or launches proceed. Examples include residual above tolerance after mitigation, acceptance requests that cross defined loss caps, or transfers that rely on novel exclusions or untested indemnities. Design these gates to be quick and evidence-based. The team presents the scenario, the thresholds, the proposed treatment, the expected residual with verification plans, and the TCO versus expected loss reduction. The role of the gate is not to second-guess engineering detail. It is to enforce appetite in practice and document accountable choices. Risk appetite drifts over time if it is not recalibrated. Require annual reviews and after major incidents or strategy shifts. Growth into new markets, mergers, margin pressure, regulatory changes, or a headline event can all make last year's thresholds absurdly tight or dangerously loose. A structured recalibration looks at realized incidents and losses, near misses, audit results, customer churn, and regulatory findings, then re-anchors thresholds to current reality and forward plans. Close the loop by comparing how many escalations occurred, how often residual exceeded tolerance, and where accepted risks lingered past their review dates. Appetite is a management instrument, not wall art, and its readings must match the organization's current speed and terrain. Consider a product launch scenario where a treatment mix lowers residual below tolerance without stalling delivery. A team plans to release a new payments feature with elevated fraud exposure during the first 3 months. Appetite allows moderate financial risk for growth initiatives, but tolerance caps monthly fraud losses at $200,000 and false declines at 2%. The mix becomes mitigate with velocity limits and device fingerprinting to cut attack success by half within 4 weeks. Transfer with the transaction insurance product for losses above $100,000 per month during the first quarter. Accept a narrow residual while fraud models learn, with assigned review at day 30 and 60. Delivery proceeds on schedule, and residual traces under the cap while evidence improves the mitigation. Teams remember what they can see at a glance, so build a one-page scoreboard that ties appetite statements to thresholds and live metrics. Place category thresholds, safety, availability, privacy, fraud, on the top line with their counters and time windows. Under each, show current performance against the cap, recent trend, and the number of escalations or acceptances in force. Include a small next review box with the scheduled recalibration date and any incident-driven interim checks. When leaders carry this page into decision meetings, appetite stops being a paragraph in a policy and becomes a dashboard that frames the conversation in the same units every time. To finish the loop, the scoreboard should feed back into the register and governance cadence.
When a threshold is approached or breached, the linked scenarios and their treatments should surface with owners, due dates, and evidence status. When performance sits comfortably below thresholds for multiple cycles, that is not an invitation to relax vigilance, but a prompt to reconsider whether resources are best allocated there or redirected to hotter spots. When escalations become frequent in a category, that signals an appetite-strategy mismatch that executives must resolve explicitly. The scoreboard is a memory anchor and a navigation aid. It shows where you said you would steer and whether the helm is actually following.
A common pitfall is writing appetite in prose that reads well but does not bind behavior when trade-offs bite. Another is setting thresholds that only a centralized team can compute, which turns real-time decisions into email threads and delays. Avoid both by keeping statements plain and thresholds computable from systems already in use by operations, finance, legal, and product. Keep the number of thresholds small enough to remember, but cover the categories that matter to safety, continuity, privacy, and integrity. Precision lives in the measurement definitions, not in exotic math. When a number needs translation before readers understand it, rewrite the sentence so the translation is built in.
An executive summary should distill the above into a 2-minute briefing. Here is what we will accept, what we will not, and how we will know quickly. Put appetite statements in the leader's language with 1 sentence each, followed by the scoreboard that shows current posture. Show 1 example decision from the last month where thresholds drove a different choice than would have been made without them. Show 1 acceptance and its review date. The goal is to make appetite a working instrument for steering, not a compliance artifact. When leaders use it in conversation, it will cascade into daily habits at every level. In conclusion, write appetite in measurable terms and enforce it through thresholds, treatments, and gates that anyone can apply consistently. Define appetite and tolerance in the units that govern real pain and value, and derive criteria from strategy, regulation, and stakeholder promises. Choose among avoid, mitigate, transfer, and accept with explicit selection criteria, verified control effects, and TCO set against expected loss reduction. Keep appetite fresh through scheduled recalibration and incident-driven checks, ground it with a 1-page scoreboard, and make it visible in the register and in pre-commit reviews. As a concrete next step, draft a short appetite statement and 2 tolerance metrics for executive review so decisions in the coming quarter move with purpose rather than by instinct. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.